Right, good afternoon, everybody. I won't actually put it onto presentation mode because it's going to be a fleeting moment just to welcome you all this afternoon. It's our third Schools Network session, and today's focus is on sports as a catalyst for violence prevention. So just some housekeeping from me. We do record the session, so if you would like to keep your cameras off, please do. But more importantly, they're a resource for you to use after the sessions to share with colleagues and to use maybe back in your settings as staff CPD. We've got jam-packed agenda, as I've already said, so we're going to start off with Graham from Street Games, followed by Jimmy, and then Ellie Fox and Neil Burkett on their She Inspires programme, and finally with from Toxteth Elite. We'll be finishing off the session with a few updates and opportunities, so please do hang around for those. We'll be updating you on the Young People's Wellbeing and Safety Survey, as well as 2 events and dates for the diary, which we will get onto. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen there, and I'm going to ask our first presenter, Graham, to come online.
Brilliant, thanks Nadine. I'll start to share my slides, perhaps you can give me a shout when they're up. Good afternoon everyone, thanks for the opportunity to come and speak, and I'm going to talk for the next sort of 12 or 13 minutes really about probably one of the biggest questions we get asked for in this space, which is what is the evidence base for actual sports contribution when we're thinking about our vulnerable children and young people, and where can sport really add value. So I work for a community sport charity called Street Games. You may be familiar with the work of Street Games. We exist in a space that tries to support a massive network of organisations that belong to themselves, belong to each other. They don't belong to us, but what they're trying to do, each of those organisations in place in communities next to your schools, in the same estates as your schools, same communities as your schools, they're trying to use sport to support young people and get them engaged in physical activity. So a really noble sort of, we all understand the value of that. And all that work comes out of a policy space driven through DCMS. It's part of the Culture, Media and Sport, through its National Agency Sport England, who then fund programmes that work out through active partnerships, national governing bodies, and lots of sports system partners, purely driven really on trying to support young people to be more active. So more young people running around, jumping around, throwing balls around, that's great. We all understand that we can support our young people to become more active, all the associated benefits that come with that. And it's ever been thus really for the sort of 20-year lifespan of Street Games, along with other people trying to just support and look at those barriers to young people's engagement in sport. Having said that, over the last 10 years, probably the team I work with flipped through 180 degrees and started to look much more into the policy space that was driving work around young people's engagement into crime, exploitation and violence as victims or perpetrators. So very much starting to understand where was the Home Office appetite, where was the Ministry of Justice appetite in this, what were people like the Youth Endowment Fund starting to do. And of course, in the work that they're doing in that agency, in the policies that come out through those government departments, is very much they think about young people and their vulnerability. The vulnerability of people's is driven through experiences in the household and experiences on the street and in the school and the community, and everything that sort of wraps around those challenges that mean that vulnerability expertise create additional challenge for young people internalising and having low mood, low mental health, low well-being, or externalising with behaviours that potentially then get them into situations that can spiral out. And probably it's fair to say for the last 10 years, we've been standing in the middle of this conversation, spinning around in a circle, trying to bring together the approaches about inequality and inactivity with what we know drives young people's engagement in violence and exploitation, which is the vulnerability space. Excitingly, hope is on the horizon here. We're starting to see significant more connectivity across government departments in this space, more people getting into this space. You're seeing various strategies coming out, some of the stuff that's coming out through Pride in Place, the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, starting to see some stuff through DCMS in this space, through the Youth Office. So finally, we start to see that perhaps the bringing together of sport through the inactivity and young people's challenge with vulnerability could well connect, and we are here to champion the vehicle of the engagement and what that can mean. So I'm just going to move on a slide and just highlight that we've been in this space doing this work for about the last 10 years. And when we first started in this space back in sort of 2015, very much driven through the work of police and crime commissioners. Now, most of those, especially for Merseyside, that function sitting in there, moving more towards the mayoral authorities. But there was always been an appetite to think about where does sport fit with young people, give young people something to do, keep them occupied. So programs got funded in this space. But when you sort of ask commissioners, how do you know what you're putting your money into is any good? There was quite a lot of vacant looks which to come back. And invariably that's because there was a lack of an evidence base for the effective use of sport. So we sort of think it worked. We sort of champion it works. Many colleagues on this webinar will tell you it works, but where was the evidence base? And of course, where we see that gap, that presents an opportunity for sport. And so for 5 years between 2015 and 2019, 2020, we stepped into this space with our sport partner friends and the Home Office and academics and a number of different police force regions to really just start to understand what does good look like when you want to design an intervention in this space. What does that connectivity look like when you want to build the use of sport and connect it in with all the other parts of the system that are trying to support your people, including, of course, yourselves today through an education lens, but the criminal justice lens and the health lens, and lots of different systems coming together. And indeed, not just thinking about actually the act of physically engaging in sport, but actually sport is a pull. What else can we wrap around whilst young people are engaged in sport? So very much what we advocate is that perhaps that sport plus approach as well, where we wrap around significant more amounts of mentoring and volunteering and life skill development, which we know is where the magic can really support young people in that space. That work in generating significant academic content allowed us to open up a conversation with the Youth Endowment Fund. And in 2019, the Youth Endowment Fund is a £200 million endowment from the Home Office to work out what works. So really simple remit about trying to understand what helps reduce and prevent young people from engaging in violence. And we knocked on the door and we said, congratulations on your endowment. Can we have a conversation about where sport can play a role? And we shared everything we'd been doing in sport, and lots of people across the Liverpool region had helped and contributing, practicing to that examples. And the Youth Endowment Fund clearly had an appetite for this, but talked to us about really the confusing diversity of sport. I mean, it's our greatest strength really, that sport, we deliver different sports in different venues, in different spaces, in different ways, with different group sizes and different coaches. That's our strength. But when you then try and articulate that through one story, rather than telling maybe 10 stories per local authority or 50 stories per region or 1,000 stories across the country, how can we get one story in sport? And so the Youth Endowment Fund actually resourced the creation of a single theory of change for the effective use of sport. And I'll just change my slide to move to that theory of change now. And this is a really important landmark for sport, because this theory of change allowed us to develop an articulation of what you could expect to see if you then worked with intentionally designed sport-based intervention. So this then stopped sport talking about, I do football and it works, I do rugby, it works, I do dancing, it works, I do boxing, it works, blah, 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 blah. And it actually shifted the narrative to start to talk about why we do the work. And indeed, the reason that we do the work is very much the right-hand side of this theory of change pictorial diagram, which is about supporting young people to attain and retain a pro-social identity. The idea of young people being future-focused and aspirational and supported and connected is exactly where the magic happens. And that's the outcomes that we're trying to produce, long-term outcomes to support young people to hopefully not then join the slippery slide into situations that will leave them exposed to crime, violence, exploitation as victim or perpetrator. So we're very much talking about the outcomes that come from engaging in sport rather than just the act of taking part in sport. This model allows sport as a delivery mechanism to talk about what it's really good at. And what it's really good at is it's really good about taking young people where they're at and thinking about them as children and young people, and less so about perhaps the behaviour that they've engaged in, the offence they've taken part in, the experience they've had, and focus back on those as individuals. And by thinking and recognising the vulnerability and the trauma in that space, it allows sport to purely focus on taking a strengths-based approach. And it's that strengths-based approach in that sort of pro-social child-first manner that allows sport to sit very comfortably into the education sector, into the criminal justice sector, to sit alongside youth justice pathways, because it aligns the language, it aligns the approach. So what are we talking about? What can we measure for young people taking part in sport? So we're starting to see in this space, this is about young people growing in confidence, growing in resilience, young people with more positive social connections, young people making more positive decisions, young people with increased resilience, young people with increased well-being, young people being more physically active. And when you start to then be able to measure the effect of that, that's the narrative that builds the confidence with yourselves as education practitioners, or on a separate webinar with criminal justice practitioners, or delete as applicable. It allows us to bring that shared focus on the young person and their outcomes to the joint conversation that we seek to have. What we then do, if we're going to drive those intermediate outcomes, is we really look to support the sports sector to develop very strong evidence-based intentional delivery. So partners sit around the sports system, and then we advocate for partnerships and support through mechanisms like the VRP within Merseyside to help us connect into sport and start to bring that evidence-based to life. So the delivery is intentional to drive those outcomes, which are the bit that we come together on. So this very much talks about how sport can work with young people at a differentiated level of need and vulnerability. So we're very much thinking about sport in the universal space, a good fun activity, which is full of sort of social development, connections, supportive. But we also know for a lot of the young people that we focus on, especially through the lens of violence, that additional need and vulnerability means those young people need a more bespoke, more designed intervention in that space. And so my final slide that I'm going to move to now is very much demonstrating that this is an intentional blend of what I would say is sport and then the wraparound. We all recognise that sport is a massive pull for young people. It's not the be-all and end-all. There's really strong arguments for lots of different activity in this space through that positive agenda, but definitely sport is one of the big players, being able to pull young people towards it. Very much vulnerable young people often get pushed towards different interventions, different services. We find sport is attractive and is a pull. What we need to start to think about is, as we're working with those young people where the need is higher, the vulnerability is higher, potentially moving on to the customer thresholds of services and engagement into those sorts of places, we need to be more intentional about the blend that we bring to this. So we bring sport and then we wrap around those smaller groups with a stronger focus on the needs of the young person, with a more intentional coach to young person ratio, where actually we start to build those wraparound mentoring, the support, the real one-to-one focus in this space. And I guess what we're trying to do in the sports system is we are always looking to work with our strengths. So we want to work with organisations, we want to leave a sport at the right level, delivered in the right way to meet the needs of the young people that you're looking to do. And so that intentional blend that allows us to create a system that moves up, moves down, so a step up or step down, or a system that doesn't let down becomes really important. So in conclusion, what I'm trying to talk to colleagues today about through your lens in education is that there is a strength that intentionally designed sport can play in this space. This is not necessarily the sport for competition, the sport for winning at all costs, the elite sport. There's perhaps a space for that, but we come today under the Gathering the Merseyside Violence Reduction Partnership. And so we're thinking about vulnerability, and also we're thinking about really using the application of sport, the intentional design of sport, and collectively, BU, part of VIP, be a part of education, or part of the sports system that's going to talk a lot today. When we all put those outcomes for young people, those strengths-based outcomes for our children and young people, first and foremost in our minds, then we can create really, really effective interventions in this space. Thanks, Nadine.
Thanks, Graham. That was really powerful and impactful. I think a really great way to start this session to really frame our thinking and our understanding around some of that intentional blends. I really like that phrase. I will be taking that, magpieing that and using it as I move forward.